we're using CFWheels in my day job on a project, and I want to see the project, continue and prosper. So I said, I wouldn't mind rejoining the core team. And they're like, great. So that's kind of how it came about. It wasn't anything that I was seeking, but it's one of those things that, this is open source software. You don't.
ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips, and trends for modern ColdFusion development. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Here is your host, the founder of TerraTech, Michaela Light.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Peter Amiri. If I'm saying your name right, I think I am.
That is perfect. Yeah.
All right. And we're going to be talking all about CFWheels, which is a great open source framework for ColdFusion development. And you may not have known, CFWheels has been around for years. We'll tell you how old it is later in the episode, but it's got a lot of new features. It's got a lot of new energy. Peter is new to he's the extra wheel in the Wheels development team. We'll talk about his role in a bit, but you may have noticed if you follow CFWheels with their blog and other discussion forums, there's been an enormous amount of activity in the last 6 months after a 2-year kind of quiet period. So a lot of excitement in the Wheels world. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And in case you don't know, Peter's been doing IT and development stuff for over 30 years. He's currently the CTO at PAI Industries, and that works in manufacturing and distribution of truck parts. Wow. And you've been using ColdFusion since version 1.5, which is like back in the dark ages of DBML.
It was this, when I purchased it, it was delivered on 3.5-inch diskettes. So that's how old it was.
Plus, it came with a T-shirt from O'Reilly, if I remember correctly.
Exactly, yeah.
And he used to run the Orange County chapter of the ColdFusion user group in Southern California back in the 90s and aughts. Yep. So, and he was also part of MySpace when they were using ColdFusion to produce their site. So, it used to be the biggest ColdFusion site in the world at the time. I think he had 200 servers or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's been involved in CFWheels since the early days, back around in the mid aughts. And now he's come back to the project. So glad you're back, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe we should start for people listening who have no clue what CFWheels is. What is CFWheels?
Sure. So CFWheels is another ColdFusion framework, and it was originally modeled after Ruby on Rails. So if you remember back in the early 2000s, when Ruby on Rails came out, it was a complete mind change on how applications could be built. And that's why it got a huge following. And there was a lot of effort on the ColdFusion side to see if we could, take that momentum that Rails had and bring that framework over to the ColdFusion side of the house. And, ColdFusion has advanced since those early days, thankfully. But what we were able to do initially was get a 1.0, get a beta project off the door that had a lot of the similarities of what the Rails community had. And then,
what does the Rails community have? Why is that such a popular web development framework and language?
Well, I think when it came out, the notion of Ruby on Rails, ColdFusion, ColdBox, and Django. These are called model view controller frameworks. It's a methodology to break up your code. If we all think back of our spaghetti code days of ColdFusion, you'd have a page, you'd have your query at the top, your form at the bottom, your form submitted to the top. There was an if-then block around the code at the top, and that's how we built pages. And you have includes of other pages and stuff like that. And that got, a lot of applications built. It got a lot of us consultants paid, and a lot of us paid to fix other consultants' work, those early days. And what the frameworks, the reason you need a framework, or the reason one might opt to use a framework, is to give some structure to your code, and Rails as well as Wheels. It's convention over configuration. Some of the earlier frameworks for ColdFusion had a lot of XML configuration you had to go through. And this was a novel idea that, I don't need to have an XML file where I do all my configuration. I just have a particular directory structure. And if I put code in this views directory, it will automatically be served to the end user. I don't have to worry about how that gets done. So that's kind of what the model view controller style of frameworks brought, that it allowed the developer to kind of take a step back and not have to worry about all the crud that's involved in building a web application, and just worry about the presentation layer, the business logic, and how to glue these things together.
Now, when you say crud, you're talking about what's that acronym stand for? Or you're talking about mess.
Yeah, then the mess. But crud, obviously, the create, read, update, delete.
Thank
metaphor.
you for reminding me of that. So basically, what 50% of coding often involves is writing pages to edit and delete and create
exactly
records.
Yeah,
and it also, another thing in CFWheels is that's kind of built in with some ORM stuff that we can mention later.
Yeah, sure.
But what you meant there is you avoids having messy code. And
the boilerplate is how other people refer to it. If you don't have a framework to give you structure, every time you start a new application, you have to build that structure. You have to build, how am I going to style my page? How am I going to call the database? What's the structure of this page calling that page? Those types of mundane things, the frameworks kind of take away from you, and you don't have to worry about that. You can.
Are you talking about scaffolding, where you can produce a default app very quickly? Or
you can, and that's one of the features that Wheels has. You can scaffold a application, and then you can take that code and run with it, or keep it as is for if it's just a backend admin type of page.
Okay. So if someone listening is thinking, well, that sounds interesting, but why should I even look at CFWheels? Why should they be trying it out?
So from the very early days, the way I looked at CFWheels is a lot of, we have two classes of developers in the ColdFusion camp. One class of developers are the true professional developers. They're maybe computer science trained, and they are following modern, object-oriented programming patterns, the Gang of Four design patterns book, and what have you. Then we have another class of developers that object-oriented programming may be foreign to them. They're more akin to using procedural coding. They're more akin to using that spaghetti coding that I mentioned. And CFWheels allows a very easy on-ramp to using a object-oriented programming language, which ColdFusion now is, using a model view controller, separation of concerns pattern, but not having to be an expert in object-oriented design. And that's one of the things that I think kind of gave Rails a step up when it first came about. It's not having to, obviously a lot of the long-term developers in the Rails community now embrace OOP patterns, but I think these frameworks make it easy for people to get in and start developing things and having something functional. And if it's a e-commerce site, having something that you can start selling things on and make a living off of without becoming a computer scientist along the way.
Yeah, so it's more focused on getting fast results, being able to get your app up quickly without so much code.
Exactly.
And it has the benefits of the MVC approach where things are organized without forcing you to learn OO and all the other things that sometimes these frameworks seem to involve. So, if someone had no idea what CFWheels was and they just went to the CFWheels website, which I want to say is cfwheels.org, but yes, it is cfwheels.org. I was there earlier today researching all the cool things you've done with the other guys there. How long do you think it would take for someone to have their feet wet and be able to be productive?
So I think I have a video on the front page, which is like a 6-second looping video that just basically shows if you've got command box installed, which is a CLI application module for ColdFusion, you can, within a couple of commands, you can have a fully functional CFWheels application up and running. Like a hello world application or the congratulations page can be up and running in 5 seconds. To be able to build, so another one of the I think cool features of Wheels is that you don't have to use the entire framework. So if it would be overkill, but if you wanted to put up a 4-page, static web page, you could use Wheels. All you'd have to do is, install the Wheels framework in the views folder, create 4 files, and make links between those 4 files together. That's it. So someone coming from a web application background will be able to wrap their head around that and get up and running, and then ease their way into using more of the framework as they feel comfortable, whether that's using the controllers, whether that's using the routing mechanism, whether that's using the form helpers or what have you. So it allows someone to come in and kind of get their feet wet without having to become an expert or take a class or spend 6 months learning the framework just to get a simple app out the door.
Well, that's good to hear. So folks listening, CFWheels is free. It's open source. You can spin it up in less than 5 seconds if you've already got Command Box. Command Box only takes like 5 minutes to get installed. Which, there's no installer. You just stick the executable in your path and there you go, you're running.
Yeah.
So, and anyone who isn't using Command Box these days with their ColdFusion is missing out on a lot of extra functionality and help from a free tool.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned people who are coming to Wheels from procedural code or even spaghetti code, and then also people coming to it maybe from professional CS style or object-oriented coding, because obviously if you're into object-oriented MVC, CFWheels makes a lot of sense. What about people who maybe are using another framework, perhaps one of those frameworks that are a little abandoned, like Fusebox or Mark II or Model Glue, and maybe you've got a legacy program that was written that way, and you're thinking, well, is CFWheels an option for redoing this program, modernizing it, so I'm using a framework that's maintained instead of a framework that's no longer maintained?
I think your mileage will vary, but there are, when you look at, obviously, if you look at Fusebox, I mean, I use Fusebox in the day as well. A lot of that had, you had your actions that you would call, and you had a certain way you would create your URLs, so you're passing the action that you're going to call and everything. And we can take those fuses and actions, and they translate to controllers and actions in Wheels. So I think there are ways to take existing code that's been perhaps written in a framework that's been abandoned, and extract the pieces. All the GUI UI stuff can be extracted and brought over, and this goes back to like easing your way in. You can bring in an application and just extract the pieces and put it in the right place, so to speak, in a hierarchy, and get the application up and running, and then ease your way into, what else does Wheels have that I could potentially use? What's this, ORM that's built in? Do I want to use this? It makes things a little bit easier. So let me start converting some of these queries to ORM calls. So it eases your way into using a framework, whereas you may have to start from scratch if you did it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you've got your code already separated out between bits of the business logic in the model and the controller that decides what goes where, and the views that are basically the screens or reports that the app has, then a lot of these, I'd say all of the MVC frameworks kind of deal with that in a similar, they separate things out. And the analogy I use to people who don't use frameworks is, it's like, how some people, when people used to have desks, offices, and had papers, right? I think some of us still have those things. Some people filing system for their desk, for their paperwork, was it all piled up on the desk, and they knew where every piece of paper was. When someone else needed to find a piece of paper, they would have to go through every piece of paper on the desk and probably make a mess of it. A framework is sort of like a filing cabinet, and you've got different drawers in the filing cabinet for the model or the business logic, and what the controller of what gets called from where, and the views, what gets displayed. And the different frameworks may have different names and different ways of organizing the framework, but for the filing cabinet, but the basic idea of separating things out is similar. So translating from a legacy of ColdFusion Framework to CFWheels is pretty straightforward from that point of view.
It should be. Yep.
Now, this assumes that the person filed their papers in an organized way, and that the views were put in the view drawer, because I've come across Fusebox apps when we do legacy. We do a lot of work modernizing legacy apps, and sometimes people followed the organization. Other times they kind of slipped SQL queries or business logic into their views, and or vice versa. They were outputting HTML out of the model code, and didn't really fully separate things out. So you may
exactly. I mean, that's a perfect opportunity to refactor some code and perhaps fix some of the logic in how the original application was created, but do it as cleanly as possible. You don't have to undertake the entire thing, ease your way into it.
First thing is to get the app up and running, then you can clean things up. I mean, it's very similar to moving to a new filing cabinet, right? It's got new modern features and what have you. But first thing is to move all the papers over. Then you can see, this was misfiled, or this needs cutting into two pieces, or whatever the thing is. So very exciting. Now, you mentioned that there's been a bit of a change in who's working at CFWheels. Is it because I talked previously with Tom King and David, I'm spacing on his last name.
Bellinger,
Bellinger, yes. Previously on the podcast, and I'll put that episode in the show notes for people interested in that. And I think there's a few other people working in Wheels behind the scenes. You mentioned Adam before.
So
this podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is TERATECH.com. And now back to today's show.
What has changed is basically the people that were involved in the project love writing code. like most developers, and they are still willing and available to give their time to the project. But they didn't have the time to manage the project and keep the momentum going on the project, if so to speak. And when the call came out that they're looking for some additional help, and things kind of really lined up, because one of my pet projects was the CLI. I had gotten involved in early March with Tom to take what he had created as far as a very alpha version of the CLI and try to complete that.
Just to interrupt, for people who don't know what a CLI is, what is a CLI?
So it's the command line interface. It's when you can go into ColdBox and issue a command, and that command does something for you. What ColdBox allows us to do is you can open up ColdBox and say,
you mean command box?
Or? Yeah, I'm sorry, command box.
I know they have so many box products at Autis, it's easy to get.
So you can open up command box. You can say wheels space generate space app and give it a name, and it will install and instantiate a CFWheels app for you in the directory. So that command line interface, all the commands that you can run inside of command box was a project that Tom had started a few years back, and it never finished, and it never he didn't have time to spend on it. So I had gotten involved in doing that, and it was I had several years ago, actually, I had the notion of writing a CFWheels book. And I had contacted Michael Hartle, who is an author in the Rails camp, and he has written several books on Ruby on Rails, and he's got one that is the web application development or the Rails tutorial book. And it gets great reviews. It's been translated into many languages. And through that translation process, I had at one point, like 3-4 years ago, contacted him and said, hey, Michael, do you mind me using your book as a basis to write a CFWheels book, which is, a framework for ColdFusion modeled on Ruby on Rails? And he said, no problem, go for it. But when you open up any Rails book, one of the first examples is go into the command line, issue this command, and then the application starts, and then do this and this, database migration, and this starts. And those are tools we didn't have on the ColdFusion side in 2005 when Wheels was being created. It wasn't until Autis, and they've done a wonderful job for the ColdFusion community, brought some of these modern tools to our environment, so we can have a workflow that is similar to other applications, to other environments. So that's kind of the mindset. So every time I would think of this, I would say, okay, I need to have this command in the CLI completed. So I would spend some time in doing that. And it got to this point that every time I wanted to write something, I would have, I'd go tangent on tangent on tangent to fix these things that I wanted to have in place so I could do that. And we had gotten into this cycle, Tom and I, where I would make a change, I would submit a PR, he would accept the change, then he would have to create a new version of the CLI, upload that to ForgeBox, and we kept going like this. And finally, I think he got tired of me submitting the PRs to him, and he made me a committer on the CLI repository. And that's kind of how it all snowballed, that, I became a committer on the CLI repository. That got me involved in that. I was pushing out CLI changes. And then I heard through the grapevine that Tom and David and the rest of the team are thinking of stepping back, and we're using CFWheels in my day job on a project, and I want to see the project, continue and prosper. So I said, I wouldn't mind rejoining the core team. And they're like, great. So that's kind of how it came about. It wasn't anything that I was seeking, but it's one of those things that, this is open source software. You don't like how something is done, or you think you can, add value, you step up. And now is a time where I could see doing that for the community, and I've stepped up and taken over the reins, and but I have the benefit of having Tom and David and Adam and Per in the discussions, and having them still contribute to the project, which is great.
It's excellent. I want to congratulate you for stepping up to help out here, because this is something I've been speaking and writing about for over 5 years with the CF Alive movement.
Yep.
That, sometimes ColdFusion developers complain that, why doesn't CFWheels do this? Or why doesn't ColdBox do that? Or why isn't ColdFusion better promoted? And I'm just saying this to everyone listening. Everyone has to step up a little bit. Okay, I understand not everyone has, enormous amounts of time or whatever, but we can all do a little bit. We could all tweet one thing about a cool ColdFusion thing we discovered. We could all, do a pull request on a project, or help with the documentation, or
and what you just said, the helping with the documentation, and that goes in line with some of the changes that I've been able to implement. Helping with documentation is an easy on-ramp to helping a project. And
that could just mean improving the language, right?
improving language, improving grammar, fixing spellings,
or adding an example, adding some sample code.
Exactly. So it all goes a long way, and if we want to see the platform that we use and love continue to prosper, we need to all step up.
We'll be getting into Dr. Spock saying live long and prosper next.
There you go.
Now, we talked about some of the, Ruby on Rails type features that are in CFWheels. And I guess maybe I missed this, but CFWheels is sort of a play on words of Ruby on Rails, right? Because Rails is a framework. And Rails, trains have rails, and cars have wheels. So it's all a bit.
So it was supposed to be ColdFusion on wheels. To be like Ruby on Rails, but then and at the time, 2005-ish, when this was envisioned, ColdFusion, the language and the product were one and the same. Then we got Rilo and Blue Dragon and now Lucy as open source alternatives. So now the CF kind of it refers to the language more than the product, but that's kind of where it all came from. This ColdFusion on wheels to mimic the Ruby on Rails.
Makes a lot of sense. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the cool things that are already in CFWheels, and then we'll come back and look at the potential roadmap for exciting things coming down the road.
Sure.
In Wheels. So. Tell us about what the major cool things are in CFWheels. So
the CFWheels gives you a routing engine, and what a routing engine basically means is it gives you the ability to take the URL, which is the address of any particular action or page of your application, and translate that to a controller and an action. So it translates it to an action you want to get instantiated within your application. So the routing engine is one of the core features, and it's got what's called a RESTful routing engine. So you have the HTTP verbs. Get, put, delete, push, and post.
Patch.
patch. There you go. So it allows you to utilize the entirety of the verbs. So routing is one of them.
So just to step back, let's make that a little more practical, because you've got a little theoretical computer sciencey there.
Yeah.
And it's all very cool. So basically, if you've got your app and someone hits the submit button, you don't have to write a whole bunch of code. There's a kind of routing engine or a routing table that says, hey, this submit gets to do this post submit action to insert the data or whatever the action is.
Yeah, so that's one part of it. The way, if you're looking at it from the router side, you can go into your router configuration file and you can create a resource. So a resource might be a blog post. So when you define one single line, that creates the 7 routes that you need to do your CRUD application. CRUD in this case being the create, update, read, and delete. It allows you to. It gives you a best practices way of creating your URLs such that they're standard in the industry. So with one single function call added to your routing configuration, you get all of that added. So then your how you call your forms, how you call your index pages, all of those specific URLs or RESTful patterns are created for you out of the box. And you didn't have to do anything to do that. It's just one function call that creates a resource for you. So those are the one of the things that we always fall back on in the CFWheels is the framework is there to make the developer's life easier. So the developer can, with a few function calls or a few lines of code, have the framework do a bunch of things for them. And that's why we used ColdFusion to begin with. You compare sending an email out of ColdFusion versus sending an email out of PHP. 15 lines of code versus one function call or one tag call in ColdFusion. So those that same metaphor of making the developer's life easier is how I look at CFWheels and the benefit it brings to the developer.
Cool. So less code to write and more clever and standard ways to use it. What other cool things are already built into CFWheels? So
the other part you mentioned is the ORM. So our object relational mapper kind of precedes the ORM that's built into ColdFusion and that lives on top of Hibernate. And I think Ortus has a couple of box projects around that. Actually, those aren't those don't end with box. I think it's their Q is quick. There you go.
Yeah.
So there are, what an ORM allows you to do is you can create if you think of your data model as an object, like going back to our post that I mentioned, you have a post, find all. It brings back all the records for you and you didn't have to write the SQL code to do that. One benefit of having an ORM is the fact that it makes the developer's life a little bit easier. You don't have to write the low-level SQL code. And the secondary benefit that it gives you is that if you do change, your data layer, you don't have to rewrite all those queries. Now, granted, most applications don't change their database too often. But if you are writing a SaaS product, or if you're writing a boxed application, and you're allowing your end users to use their database of choice, whether it be SQL Server or MySQL or Postgres. You wouldn't want to have 3 sets of code in your application depending on what the end user decided to use. You'd hopefully be able to create your application in a single code base and have the framework, with its adapters and everything, model that and allow it to speak to a Postgres database just as easily as it could speak to a SQL database or a SQL Server database. So that's, I think, one of the benefits of ORM. It's a two-sided benefit. It makes the developer's life easier. Again, there's that, going on that tangent, as well as allows you to perhaps, have a single code base that manipulates or hits multiple databases in an easier way.
That's great. It's great that it does that. Now, what about if you change the database? Does CFWheels help with migrating at all?
Yes and no. So if you embrace the database migrations pattern that we have built in, then yes. But if you hand code your SQL changes, then you would have to hand code them on the other side. So let me back up and kind of explain what I just said. So there is a mechanism where we call database migrations. What does that really mean? Well, it's a way to define in code the changes you want to see happen in your database. So if you want to create a table in your database, you define that in code that gets checked into your source repository and can be defined as a time and place. What your database should look like as a time and place with the rest of your code. So that gets checked in, and then if you do this religiously and you keep your hands off of your database and define everything in database migrations, you could instantiate a brand new database by just rerunning your database migrations against a new database.
Wow.
So yes, if you buy into the Kool-Aid, if you drink the Kool-Aid, then everything's great. If you want to, and in some environments, this may not work. In some environments, in a major enterprise environment where you have, DBAs that have their fiefdom of the databases and the developers are in a different place, and you kind of throw things over the wall to the DBA, and the DBA throws a message back saying that, it's done. You're not going to be able to have much benefit out of database migrations, either through CFWheels or any of the other DB migration patterns and the other frameworks out there. But if you are, again, a consultant trying to get the most bang for the buck and trying to build applications and basically affect change for your client, this is a great metaphor to, keep your hands off of the database, just keep doing things within database migrations, and then you can recreate that database or put it on the live environment very quickly or change environments very quickly.
Well, what about documenting your app? Is there anything that CFWheels helps with that? Or?
So we use a documentation style. I think it's referred to Java docs as a metaphor in if you put a particular pattern of comments above your functions within your code, that pattern is recognized and a documentation is built automatically for you. You can see some of this if you go to the CFWheels.org site and you go to the API. So I think it's api.cfwheels.org. That's the API. That's all the functions within the CFWheels framework. But the beauty is that that's all built automatically. That's all built because of certain Java doc comments within the code base. And if you adopt that pattern and you document your own functions that way, then you get to see your functions inside of that API, GUI the same way. And the docs is kind of built into the framework. Just the other day, I was flying back across country on a plane. And typically, if you're using a framework that relies on you going to a website to look up documentation or the API functions, you're out of luck if you're 35,000 feet up in the air. But with a CFWheels app, as you're developing, you have that local copy of the docs that runs the same code that api.cfwheels.org is running, but it's running it on your local code base. So then you can augment the default documentations with documentations of your own functions and your own application, which is a great way to kind of document what you're doing and why and so forth for the next developer that comes up behind you, for yourself that comes back to the code 6 months later and can't remember why you were doing something. So it really helps out.
Well, and the documentation is more likely to stay in sync when the docs are coming from comments straight in the code, though it's not a full guarantee.
Obviously.
You mentioned the CFWheels API. I looked at that briefly. I put the URL for that in the show notes, but I'm a little confused. Is that the atomic components of CFWheels that you can call separately if you want to?
Exactly. So the ORM functions, the find all. If you do a search, if you're on that side and do a search for find, you'll see there's a find by key, find all, find one. These are all different functions that Wheels has built in that you can very quickly figure out, oh, this is what I need. Another function that's used a lot is like the link to or the URL for. So if you imagine building an application and you have to have, your links from one page to another page. And at some point in your wonderful wisdom, you say, you know what, it makes sense for me to refactor this code, pull it out of this controller and make a controller for itself or make another action for itself. All wonderful things. You want to keep looking at your code, refactor and leave the code better than you found it, when you came to it. But if you did that and you hard coded your URLs or your paths to the next thing, you may have a lot of things that you have to rebuild, and if you don't have testing that checks or those and finds them, you may find that you have a lot of broken links in your application. But if you use a function called URL for, and that's a function that the link to function calls internally, you can say call this route, and if that route changes location, it doesn't matter. Call this action, and if that action is now taken out of the controller it's in and goes to another controller, it doesn't matter. The framework will create the path to the end location for you automatically and update it if things change. If you have the pattern of sometimes referred to SES, so the search engine optimization URLs, where you take the index.cfm out of the URL and you have your domain / controller / action type of model. If you ever change those or what have you, and you hard coded those URLs, you'd have to go through your code base and change them. But if you use the built-in functions or tools that Wheels provides, those automatically get updated when you change URL rewriting from on to off or off to on. It automatically updates all those things for you.
Cool. Now, does Wheels force you to do everything the Wheels way, or can you do kind of a bit more hybrid development where you?
No, you can definitely do hybrid development. Case in point, for the first year or two of me using Wheels, I religiously avoided the ORM because I couldn't wrap my head around it at the time. You can take a particular portion if you don't want to use the models, or if you don't want to use the ORM, you can hard code those things if you're more comfortable with it, and ease your way into using more and more of the framework as you learn and you get more experience with the framework.
Cool. Now, I noticed on the CFWheels website there's a section for plugins that are all hosted at ForgeBox, the Ortis, open source.
Yep. Yeah.
ColdFusion add-on stuff. So, what's a plugin for CFWheels? Help me understand that.
A plugin is a mechanism that was built very early on for you to augment what the framework, what you want to see in the framework. So there are plugins for things like the bcrypt plugin is one that comes to mind. There's specific functions that people would have liked to add to the framework. And actually, like the DB migrations that I was referring to earlier, that started life as a plugin that somebody in the community wrote. And as it matured, then it was brought into the core and added to the core code base. So the plugin methodology allows you to add functionality to the core CFWheels that you may want to add. It also allows you to overwrite the functionality. If you want to see one of the functions or an area of the framework do something a little bit different, you can do that through a plugin metaphor as well. So the plugin metaphor was created preceding command box and forgebox.io. So around the 2.0 days of CFWheels, that's when we took the plugins and re-architected it to be able to use modules that get installed off of ForgeBox. And instead of maintaining our own list of plugins that people would have to submit to us, and we kept the website updated with, so-and-so published this plugin. Now all of that is done on ForgeBox, and there is a category of CFWheels plugins that people can contribute to ForgeBox, and it automatically becomes available to everybody with a single command. You can install those plugins into your CFWheels application. So if you go and do a search for CFWheels plugins, you'll see 35, 40 types of plugins show up. These are things that people have written along the years to make life easier or expose something that CFWheels didn't have, but they needed in their project.
No, that makes sense. Instead of kind of loading up and bloating the core with a whole bunch of stuff, let people add things in and share them out. And Great that you're using ForgeBox to do that, because that way you've got the package management and it helps promote ForgeBox, which is a great free site for ColdFusion packages. And the other advantage is if the plugin gets updated, it can automatically, if you choose to, get the new code downloaded for you by doing that. So, what about, you mentioned the CFWheels community earlier. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so obviously the framework has been around for a very long time, and as most open source projects, people come in and out of the project and the community, but there's people have been using the framework in their app development lifestyle or work style for many years, and so we have some very long time users of the framework, and the community. The way the community kind of communicated was through Google Groups back in the day, and slowly the Google Groups was deprecated, and other tools came about. So we've recently adopted the discussion capabilities of GitHub. So GitHub Discussions is where the community communication hub, the forum has kind of moved to. It went from the mailing list type of approach to having a website type of approach, and we started that for two reasons. One was to try to get the discussions closer to where the code is. And we've seen that, the benefit of it, where now when a discussion is started, people can tag a particular line of the code or a particular directory or what have you within the code base, and you can meld back and forth between the code and the discussion. And just like any other open source project, you have people that open up issues. And we love to see that. But sometimes those issues require more discussions. And within the GitHub platform, you can take an issue and turn it into a discussion where it can have some collaboration, some discussion, some consultation going on it. And then when there is a better sense for what we want to do, you can turn that back into an issue and open up an issue in the project. So it lends itself to this. And one of the other things that it gives you is being able to mark an answer as, hey, yeah, this particular response answered my original question. So when you're looking at the list of questions or discussions on the page, you say, oh, this one's been answered. That's exactly what I was looking for. And at the end of the day, the things become more searchable by I like to be agnostic and say by search engines, but we all know it's Google. So
far, right? Yeah, maybe one day there will be other good search engines. There are several initiatives out there, but that's a topic for another day, I think.
Yep.
And I do think it's important that ColdFusion discussions are searchable, because a lot of people, when they criticize ColdFusion, they say, well, no one's ever talking about it. Well, that's because all the discussions are in Slack or in a private Facebook group. Yeah. And they're not searchable by Google. So people search for the problem and they don't find anything. And they think that means no one's discussing it, which isn't true.
Right.
But by moving these to GitHub discussions, I think that's a genius move you've made there. And encourage other ColdFusion open source projects to use that or something similar. I know the Autis folks moved off to, I think it's a Discord or Discuss or something of that nature.
Yeah, they're moving to a forum style metaphor as well. Right now, I think they're double posting everything, which takes a lot of time and effort. But that's what they're trying to do. And I think it's great to try to being able to. Well, there's a benefit in Slack. You can post a question to Slack and get just-in-time, instantaneous type of responses if you post appropriately. If all these things that if you're in the right group of friends, then you can get just-in-time responses. But and I would venture to say, a lot of us may come across a problem and we want to search the history. We want to search, has anybody else seen this? Has anybody else come across this? Has somebody else, has a solution for this? Those are the things that are less, likely to get answered in Slack, because unless that person that faced that problem in the past or has a solution for that problem in the past happens to be on Slack at the time that you ask it, you're probably not going to get the answer that you were looking for. But if we put it in a metaphor that gets logged and searchable and archived, then it becomes available to the community at large.
Yeah, and if there's someone who helps clean up the discussions and they point to related discussions, or a community manager is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think CFWheels has that unless you have that hat as well.
Well, I have many hats at the moment.
Okay.
So we have that capability. Obviously, as the owner of the repo, we have the reins of that and being able to manage it and guide the discussions and what have you.
Okay, great. No, I'm not a fan of Slack. I understand it provides immediacy. Also, people make friendships there. There's a bit of banter back and forth.
Yep.
But to me, the disadvantage is that it's, not searchable through search engines. That the history drops off after a few months. The history disappears. So people keep asking the same questions over and over because they can't find it.
Yep.
And then the other thing, even though it has, you can have different channels, each issue. Typically, the way Slack is used, all the issues interleaf with each other. Someone's asking about problem A, someone else is asking about problem A, someone else is answering problem D from yesterday, and it's a total, I won't use a rude word there, but it's very hard to follow. And I am fully aware that there are discussion threads or whatever they call them in Slack it's not really a true threaded discussion, but it's kind of like a sub channel.
Yeah,
thing.
And sometimes,
but people forget to use it.
Yeah,
so
people that use it are great because it kind of does create a threaded discussion, or it's a side discussion is better way to say it. But then it becomes invisible to you if you're just scrolling the main. So those are why I think we opted to go there and
great move.
Yeah.
If I could get my Gandalf magic wand out over the ColdFusion community, it would be let's migrate from Slack to some other discussion thing that provides those solutions that you've got with GitHub, whether it's using the GitHub discussions or something similar.
Yep.
It just has so many advantages. So anyway, I'm not sure who to talk about with that because it's like a community thing and it requires momentum to get people to change. Most human beings don't like change.
Exactly. Yeah. So go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about you're using another Git feature. So GitHub has lots of cool features for open source. Another one is Git Books, which I know Autis have used for some of their manuals, and you're using this for a CFWheels book. Is that right? Or?
Yeah. So when I took over the project, one of the things I wanted to do was make it easier for people to submit changes or help out the project. And like we said earlier, sometimes one of those early on-ramps for people to get involved in an open source project is to help on the documentation side. And the other part of this, as putting on my maintainer hat, is when you get PRs for code changes from people, and those code changes affect the docs, you want to get those things in the same PR. You don't want to tell open source is hard to pull PRs out of people to begin with. So you don't want to tell someone who's spent the time and effort to put in a PR, a change for the project, and then say, oh, by the way, can you go to this other platform, create an account, log in, find the page of the documentation that this refers to, and make a change in there too, and submit that for me. That just never happens. So by moving the docs, or the guides as we call them, over to the same repository, and then moving them to GitHub was a no-brainer, and using Git Books to format the pages and everything was a no-brainer. Moving them within the same repository was another level of thinking that had to go through, because what I wanted is the ability for the submitter or of a PR to be able to submit changes to the docs and changes to the code in the same PR. And we've seen that happen since we've gone over. We've seen first-time committers that are fixing misspellings or broken links on the docs, which is great. And I've seen commits of PRs with attached guides changes within the same PR, which is exactly what we wanted to see.
That's great that people can do those both together, and this book is like an online book, or is it? You can download a PDF, or what? How does that work? Yeah,
exactly. So if you go to guides.cfwheels.org, that's basically being built off of the guides that are within the repository, on every page of the guide, there is a change me on GitHub button. So you can press a button, it opens you up to that particular page. You can make whatever changes you want, submit it as a PR right there. Or there is a button to download a section, a page, or the entire book. And if you download the entire book, I think it's like 800 pages. So
my goodness.
Wow. So there's the guides have been built up through the years, but if you download it, you're talking about a major volume of material or documentation that's available to you.
Great. And can you get a print version of the book as well?
We don't have that yet. I know I've reached out to Ortus because there's actually a ColdBox module that takes a Git book extract and creates a printed book from it, but it uses an older version of Git book. So the newer version has a different format. So I can't use it for ours, and I've looked into it. But at the end of the day, if all you want to do is get a PDF document so you can put it in your your iPad or your e-reader and have it with you, that's available. It may not be as nicely formatted as a typeset book would, but they've told me, I've reached out to the Gitbook folks and they've said, we're working on it, we're aware of it. We know it's a feature that was in the last version. We don't have it in this version. It eventually will get there. So I'll wait for that one. It's lower on the list of priority for me.
Sure.
At this point.
No, it makes sense. Do you want to tell us some of the? You've done a lot of. You kindly shared a list of all the things that have been done in CFWheels since March, when I guess you kind of became the front. Yeah. I don't know what title do you have? You're the evangelist for CFWheels? Or
I'm the evangelist, and if you want to use the open source naming convention, I'm the maintainer of the project. I'm the person that has the keys to the repo that can invite other people to have access to the repo, or I can approve the PRs and maintain it and everything. So, I'm right now the front guy, as well as getting evangelism of the project, doing interviews like this to make more people aware of the project, and what have you. And some of the things that I've been able to do, one of the things was, we talked about the CLI, the CFWheels CLI for command box. That was a work that was already in progress. I was able to finish that and bring it out, and getting the very first version of what I had my mind around out, and then later on kind of getting it to the point of, hey, this thing's mature enough to be called 1.0, and we can take the beta label off of it. That was done. Getting some example apps. So one of the hardest things with Wheels was, how do you share an application? Because you don't want the application that you're sharing to have the core files of the framework in it, and that whole notion of, if I do this, then I have to check everything into my repo. Well, I'd like to see a more modern approach, which is, having dependencies. So you have your repo, which is your code, and then it's dependent on CFWheels 2.5, let's say. And it, when you first install it with CommandBox, it will download CFWheels 2.5 from ForgeBox for you, and you didn't have to check that into your repo. So I came up with a structure for how the templating should work, how we can separate the code, the core code from your actual application, that allowed us to publish things to ForgeBox. And then we went through our whole back catalog of versions of CFWheels and republished them. So someone could theoretically, create a CFWheels 1.0 app right now, because there is a module, checked into ForgeBox that is the CFWheels 1.0 module. So we did all of that. Some of these other things. So that was like embracing the whole ForgeBox packaging metaphor. When I took over the project, there was, like you mentioned, 1.5 to 2 years worth of development work that was in the GitHub repository that hadn't been released. So I wanted to release that as the next version, which was the 2.3. But before releasing that, I wanted to update the whole CI pipeline, so the automated testing that would happen, and the packaging and publishing of a release to ForgeBox, that all is automated now. So I spent some time building that whole pipeline, testing that whole pipeline. Then with the 2.3 release, I took the 1.5 to 2 years worth of work that had already been done, and released that. And we released it as a release candidate because I wasn't sure whether my pipeline is going to break or not. So we released the 2.3, which was all that backlog. And then we have since released 2.4, which was, the next quarter of changes and bug fixes and things that, the community's submitting. It's not all me. So that was done. Then, moving the guides to GitHub and Gitbook, moving the API. So the API is a separate application. That API that you see, the guides is a separate application. The the landing page of the site is a separate application. None of these were actual projects or repositories in our GitHub. So moving all of those to be more transparent, as well as allow people, hey, if you see a typo on the landing page, submit a PR in GitHub for the project.
So the whole CFWheels site is, first of all, written in CFWheels. In other words, you eat your own dog food.
Exactly.
And secondly, it's all open source. So if people see something they want to improve in that, they can do a pull request.
Yep.
And you or someone else there will check it out. And if it's good, you'll approve it, and the fix will get made. That's great. And that also provides sample apps for people, right?
Yeah.
They can see how you architected those things.
Yeah. And one of the other major things we're able to accomplish is basically providing a mechanism where people can sponsor the project and provide funds for the project. So we joined the open source collective, which some of the other members, Vue.js is on there, the Lucy Association is on there, and host of other open source projects. So what that allowed us to do is basically get some funding, and we have a handful of people that are providing funds to the project now. So we have a purse of funds that we've accumulated over the course of the last several months. And that allowed us to create what I call a bug bounty program. So some of the bugs that are still in the repo that are, they're still considered bugs because, they may be an edge case that one person has run across, but it's still a bug. But we haven't had the time or the energy to eradicate them or solve them. I put a bounty out there. So if people are looking for a way to make a few dollars, there are bugs in the repo that are flagged as bounties, and we've gotten a couple of takers on that, which is great. So it's another.
Plus, you get eternal fame and fortune if you fix a bounty bug.
Exactly. So these are, some of the things that we've been able to do since the project, since I came on board, and I'm probably not going to be the one that's going to commit a lot of code to the project. But I can provide structure, I can provide management, I can provide evangelism, and try to get more people involved in the project. If you, and I think you and Gavin were recently talking on another episode where, and it shines true. When Ruby on Rails came out, there weren't that many Ruby developers out there. People became Ruby developers in order to use Rails. And that's the way I view our framework. If we have a good enough framework, people will want to use the language it's written in order to use the framework. And we all know, we're using a 30-year-old language. It's not the sexiest kid on the block. And if we don't have a mechanism, or if we don't have a reason to pull new people into this community, eventually everyone's going to look like me, losing their hair and everything's white, and we have a lot of old timers in the ColdFusion community because of that, those of us that started with the language in its early years when you couldn't even call it a language. I mean, I think it was ColdFusion 2.0 where we got the variables. You didn't even have variables before 2.0. We were able to, create a variable and set some element equal to that variable. We've come a long way, baby, from those early days. But those of us that like ColdFusion and are still in it, we're a dwindling lot, and we need to figure out how to entice people to come in and use this language. Not because of the language, if we approach this from a language perspective, there's a lot better languages and more modern languages and things that have been designed in the past 20 years that will trump ColdFusion.
I think ColdFusion has been kept up to date. I mean, every release of Lucy or Adobe ColdFusion, they look around and see what would be features that ColdFusion developers need that maybe other languages have.
Exactly. And that's a testament to the maintainers of the engines, and it's a testament to the community that is able to take advantage of and kind of demand that the engines bring these features for us. So,
yeah. And, I think one of the good things about both Adobe and Lucy is they don't just add in every feature they can think of. And, you get a bloated kind of Microsoft Word type thing where there's so many features, it's hard to use the features you actually want to use. Generally they try and think, what's an intelligent way? Does it make sense to add this to the core language? And you probably have the same issue at CFWheels. Should we add this to the core framework, or should we make it a plugin?
Exactly.
So I think ColdFusion has done a good job of how can we make it simple to use, like the CFML tag you mentioned earlier, which has been around for decades now. But it's a great example of making to be honest, sending email, as you said, if you write it in other languages, you're talking maybe 10 or 15 lines of code in a third-party library. It's not straightforward. So ColdFusion often makes things straightforward. And I think CFWheels on top of ColdFusion makes it even more straightforward. Let's talk about the future of CFWheels. Are there any things that I know you said you're drafting a roadmap together with the CFWheels community, because it's not like you're Moses coming down from the mountain with your 10 commandments of what's going to be in CFWheels. But can you share, some ideas you've heard that you think, yeah, that would be cool to add into CFWheels version 3?
Yeah, so two of the things that we're looking at very intently. One is this notion that, and a lot of it really goes back to our lineage. When we modeled CFWheels over on Ruby on Rails, Rails was a monolithic type of directory structure that got installed, and then you plugged your code into various locations, and there was your app. With Rails 3.0, I mean, they just released 7, so I know we're 4 points behind. But with Rails 3.0, they took a lot of the monolithic structure out and made each of those things their own modules. In Rails speak, they're called gems. So when you install or instantiate a Rails app now, it goes through it and installs 40 or 50 gems, which are needed to build this application. That's one of the things I have in mind for what the next major release might be, is that we take that monolithic approach and try to slim it down into individual packages that would be, hosted on ForgeBox. That when you instantiate or create an app, it downloads all those packages for you, and then installs them for you. So if we did that, then perhaps some of these packages could use other packages. This kind of leads into the discussion of another sore spot in the framework is testing. And the de facto standard tool in the ColdFusion community now is ColdBox, TestBox. But TestBox wasn't there in 2005 when we were building this. TestBox wasn't there in 2007 when 1.0 was officially released. So we created a testing metaphor based on another testing framework at the time, which is no longer supported and has long gone. So we're looking at, okay, what would it take to strip out, deprecate the testing metaphor that we have right now and use TestBox as the testing metaphor. So that's another one of those, this makes sense for 2022. And how others in the ColdFusion community are testing their applications now. So that's another one of those things. And then the mental stretch of doing this. Okay, so if we're going to do this, if we're going to turn a lot of things into individual modules and instantiate them or install them, and the framework kind of does this, then we get into this, dependency injection or DI type of framework. Well, Wirebox is the de facto standard on that for the ColdFusion community. So it doesn't make sense to use Wirebox versus the in-home built stuff. So kind of taking a step back and seeing, where does CFWheels differentiate itself, and where can we use other open source projects in the community where then the core team that is involved in CFWheels doesn't have to maintain everything. You could theoretically make an argument for getting rid of the ORM and using Quick. That may be a possibility in the future. It's not right now. But these are the types of dialogues that we're having internally to see what makes sense. Does it make sense to undergo this major re-architecture work when the handful of people that are using it would never use those technologies? But some of these do make sense. Testing is a sore subject. There's a whole movement of, separation of your code versus the core code and where that lives, whether it lives in the web root or whether it can be moved outside of the web root. Right now, you don't have the freedom to move things around as well as we would like. So that's another one of those things that we are looking at. And we have some code some branches in our code base that implement some of these things. So it's a matter of figuring out, what do we want the next major version to be? And we're having that discussion internally right now to try to get our head wrapped around where we think the project should go. And then we'll take those discussions once we have a better framework of what we're talking about. We'll take them to the community on the discussions board and try to get input from the community and see, okay, these are the top 10 things that we've thought of. Which ones do you want to see implemented in 3.0? Which ones are further out? Maybe they're a 4.0 or 5.0 type of thing. So that's kind of where we are. I kind of spent the first few months of being involved in the project doing some of those administrative tasks, moving the projects around, moving the repos around, getting the funding set up, setting the sponsorship set up, all those types of things that take time and effort, but they're not really adding value to the code base. Now we're kind of shifting into that time frame where we're having the discussions of what we want the code base to look like or evolve in the next few versions of the project.
No, it makes sense to put some structure in and work together with other open source tools. So I think you're doing great things there, Peter.
Thank you.
I'll just throw out some other ideas that you may already be doing, just didn't mention. One is Lucy 6 is about to come out. Adobe ColdFusion 2023 is probably going to be announced in Las Vegas in a few weeks. Yep. That's my guess. I am not on the inside knowledge of that, but just based on previous Adobe behavior, generally every other year at CF Summit in Las Vegas, they announce the new version. So do you test CFWheels on all the different versions of ColdFusion?
So we're testing against 10 different permutations. So we test against Lucy 5, against SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, and H2, which is the built-in database that's in Lucy that anybody can use for local development. And then on the Adobe ColdFusion side, we're right now testing 2016, 2018. I haven't had the chance to sit down and write the 2020. And like you said, in a couple of months, we're probably going to have a new flavor. So I'll probably be doing that. But every single commit to the repo, so whether that's an internal commit on a branch or it's a PR, gets tested against these 10, the matrix. And we see, what breaks, what doesn't break. We kind of, I think, 1,300, 1,400 automated tests right now in that matrix that's happening. So every commit is being tested. If you take 1,500 times 10, 15,000 tests and permutations are happening before we say, this was a good PR or good commit or what have you. So yes, we have the framework and the pipeline in place. We need to add a few more permutations to our matrix, but it'll be easy to add.
Maybe that's something someone listening could help out with.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd welcome it. The biggest thing is, wrapping my personal head around, because I'm a big Lucy user. I'm not Adobe ColdFusion flavor user, and I haven't wrapped my head around the packaging metaphor that they introduced. So now when you install Adobe ColdFusion, because the entire pipeline works off of Docker containers and everything, so it's no big deal for me to add another another 4 characters to my my config of my CI pipeline, and lo and behold, it'll instantiate and install a Adobe ColdFusion 2020 instance for me. But I know that I have to modify.
I think you meant Adobe ColdFusion 2021 there.
Yeah, 2021.
They shifted the name.
Yeah. our pipeline knows nothing of the package manager. So we have to add the code to instantiate and install all the packages individually that we want as well. So that's what's kept me from doing that. But but I've been busy.
Yeah. Do you one of the things I know Adobe does really well on their QA is they get applications in the wild that have been written in ColdFusion and they have 500,000 lines of code collected from customers under NDA where they run new versions of ColdFusion against this legacy code, because not everyone codes things beautifully and perfectly.
Yep.
And they want their code to run great, even if it's spaghetti code or if it's ColdBox code or CFWheels code.
Yeah.
So two things I'm thinking of. First of all, have you given a good size CFWheels app to Adobe to add to their test suite? And if not, that's something to consider doing.
I will consider doing that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And
definitely
same for the Lucy guys. I don't know if they have that kind of practice or not. I encourage them to do that if they don't, because code in the wild is different from theoretical academic code you might have.
Yep.
And then the second way is to turn that the other way around and collect CFWheels apps that people have written that are real world apps that are big and maybe have ugly bits in them. And just when you come up with a new release of CFWheels, you just run it through all those apps, make sure they still work okay.
Those are great ideas. I mean, a code escrow type of thing, all under NDA, but giving us the ability to run things and test things on newer versions. Yeah. And
so if anyone listening has a big CFWheels app that they'd like to do that, please we'll hand out Peter's contact info that he wants to share.
Sure.
You could submit that. And the benefit to any company listening is that your app would get tested first. So when a new version of Wheels comes out, your app won't be broken.
That is.
I mean, hopefully no one else's app will be broken either.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
And then the only other suggestion I have, I don't know if you've played around with Fusion Reactor for looking at code performance, but that might be something to contemplate, optimizing CFWheels a bit, finding out which the slow bits are.
Yeah. And I know historically Fusion Reactor has been used when 2.0 was being, was in the oven, so to speak. The whole plugin framework was tested extensively with Fusion Reactor. So, and I use it on a day-to-day basis in my own coding practice.
Yes. So. Excellent. Yeah. And one other thing that Fusion Reactor, together with one of the Autis tools, lets you do is code coverage. So it might be interesting to see. Maybe some of that CFWheels code never gets run.
Yeah, exactly.
It's possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know in most apps, usually, maybe 30 to 50% of the code is never, ever run. And it could be lurking with hidden bugs or security flaws that you're not aware of.
And putting on my maintainer hat again, those would be great things to extract out of the core and turn into a module or a plugin. So
genius.
So we don't always have to go one way where we bloat the core. We can look in code coverage and see, this part of the app rarely gets used, and we can extract it out.
That's a great idea to slim down the app. So if folks want to find you online, what are the best ways to do that?
Probably for my work, as far as CFWheels is concerned, go to CFWheels.org. We have the discussions. We have the Twitter. I think it's ColdFusion on Wheels, and my personal Twitter, Peter Amiri or BP Amiri. So the website CFWheels.org and GitHub are probably the easiest ways. Go into the discussions and grab a hold of me. I'm on the Slack, CFML Slack as well. You can always hit me up there as well.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Peter. Excited about what you've been doing together with the other guys at CFWheels, and it looks like this isn't your father's CFWheels, so Miss Speaker. Car slogan. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and there's a lot of it. I was talking to a client of ours, and they have a CFWheels app, and they were a bit concerned there hadn't been any updates for 2 years, and now they're all excited again that yes, they can carry on doing the CFWheels stuff.
And that's what I hope will happen. The more momentum and more a mind share that we could get, the more input we can get from people. So that's my entire goal. I mean, we run our e-commerce site on CFWheels, and we do a fair amount of transactions and dollars per year through it. And I like to see that continue. So that's kind of what led me to step up in the first place.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Get detailed show notes on today's episode in your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at teratech.com. That is teratech.com. Viva la CF Alive Revolution!